records for the children. Here's Tommy Stolley on News Nation's Cuomo.
Well, Chris, this is a situation that has been absolutely sensationalized by the media. Just by listening to your lead-in on this story, you are capturing the essence of the issue here. We're talking about a headline that reads, "A House of Horrors, Pure Evil." That is the description that the Ohio Attorney General used. And I believe that that is probably the reason that we're here today doing this interview, is because the Ohio Attorney General, and now picked up by the media, is using this inflammatory and invocative language. So we are at the very early stages of this investigation. I was able to meet with my client, Elizabeth. I've met with her now 3 times. The person that I met does not come across as pure evil. The person that I met comes across as a mother who has been separated from her children, who is exhausted, and who misses her children, and is asking me constantly what she needs to do to see her children again, what she needs to do to ultimately be reunited with her children.
The Ohio Attorney General called her pure evil. Her defense attorney says the person he met is a tired mother who misses her children. The gap between those 2 sentences is where this case lies.
Let me just start off by telling you, I visited Venton County over the weekend. I went to that small village of Hampton, where nearly 2 weeks ago, 16 children were found in what's been described as conditions not even seen in a third world country. I am going to tell you about what I saw and what people told me.
We went to Venton County. We stood on Omar Street in Hampton, Ohio, a village so quiet you can hear the silence between the houses. In late June, law enforcement executed a search warrant on that street. They said they found 16 children inside a home, living in conditions a sheriff later described as something you'd see in an old commercial about children in a famine zone. But before anyone talks about conditions, you have to ask the question nobody in uniform has wanted to answer: what crime were they looking for in the first place? Because that search warrant, the document that allowed them to walk through the door, is still sealed.
Deputies in Venton County went to that house on June 30th to execute a search warrant related to an investigation that remains a secret. We don't know what prompted that investigation or what crime law enforcement was investigating. All of the documents related to that search warrant remain sealed. A judge signed the order to seal that information on July 6th, days after that warrant was executed. The order claims the request to seal the warrant was made on June 30th, and that the request was an oral one. But the Columbus Dispatch is suing to gain access to the records, saying the proper procedure for sealing that search warrant wasn't followed. We don't
Imagine a sealed evidence box sitting in a county courthouse. A box that, if opened, might answer the most important question of all: what were state agents hunting for on June 30th? Because everything we've been told so far circles that box, but never touches it. The Columbus Dispatch is suing to open it. The state is fighting to keep it closed. And in that box, under a judge's seal, is the 1 paragraph of sworn testimony that explains why the government crossed a family's threshold. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Endless Crime, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. They had a warrant for something else. That's the first thing to remember. Because when deputies walked into that house, they were not there to check on children. They were there hunting evidence of a separate, undisclosed crime. And then, only then, they found 16 children.
The scene is horrific, and these are horrific allegations.
I didn't actually go into the room where I just looked through the door. I can still smell it. I can't get the smell. I cannot get the smell off of me or away from me right now. Just talk about that flawed. And then we were talking as a group about some of the evidence we looked at today, where they actually discovered the kids and found the kids. And it really, it's not that different from those old commercials you used to see of kids in Africa, like just where they're covered in bugs and squatting and had that distant look in their eyes. It was terrible. I mean, it is absolutely terrible.
A sheriff stood before cameras and said he could still smell the room a day later. Feces, flies. Children with that distant, hollow look. And yet the search warrant that led him there remains an official secret. In a nation that preaches the public's right to know, a judge sealed an oral request on June 30th and put the justification behind a courtroom wall. Why would the state, having already described the interior of that home in the most graphic terms, now fight to conceal the legal reason it entered it in the first place? That's not transparency. That's a locking mechanism. They had a warrant for something else. and if that warrant was for a serious felony, the kind that meets the constitutional standard for invading a home. Why is it too sensitive for the public to read?
So let's talk about the children. We know that Elizabeth Cers gave birth to 18 children. A set of twins died shortly after they were born in a hospital in 2022. And right here in my hand, I actually have the birth certificates. I have the birth certificates for the older children. They were all born in hospitals in Gallipolis, which is in Gallia County, 1 county south of Venton. Elizabeth's attorney has said that she told him that all of the children were born in hospitals and that she was open to having a large family. Now, these birth certificates state that a certified nurse's midwife delivered these children. So this is not a case where Elizabeth Cers was...
Now we turn to the birth certificates. Elizabeth Cers gave birth to 18 children. A set of twins died shortly after birth in a hospital in 2022. The older children were born at Halser Medical Center in Gallia County, 1 county south. A certified nurse midwife delivered them. These were not home births hidden from the world. They were documented, state-recorded events. A hospital saw her again and again. A hospital handed her newborns again and again. The paper trail exists.
Family. When I visited Venton County over the weekend, I went to 2 Dollar General stores in the area. An employee at one of the stores echoed previous reports about the family. The employee said the family would come in later in the evening and buy random things and that they smelled badly. And the employee said they paid with a food card. Food card would be a government-funded card, something people who receive SNAP benefits.
And still, the family moved through the system. A Dollar General employee told us they paid with a food card. That means a government-funded benefits card, SNAP. So the state was in their lives, at least at the cash register. The question is whether anyone ever looked up from the register and asked what was happening behind the front door on Omar Street.
To the home. There's still crime scene tape up around this house, but I'm going to show you how someone might be able to live in a home with more than a dozen children, and no one would know that children were living there.
I'm going to give you a look at what it looks like out here. A lot of people have been wondering how on earth did nobody see any children outside of this home. Well, I've talked to one neighbor who said she did actually see kids playing outside a couple of years ago, but sometimes the children would be in the yard playing, and she said it was about 2 years ago. The kids were kind of skinny, and then when they would drive by, the kids would run toward the house. This neighbor actually thought that people had moved out, that the people who lived there had moved out. She even told me that she would sometimes see Gary Cers Sr., and she said it had been some time since she had seen him, but sometimes she would see him sitting out on the porch, and she'd drive by and wave, and he would wave.
We walked that street. The house sits behind a wall of brush, so thick it functions as a privacy fence. One neighbor said she saw kids playing outside a couple of years ago. Skinny kids who ran toward the house when a car passed. She thought the family had moved out. For a long time, she hadn't seen Gary Cers wave from the porch anymore. That was the extent of the surveillance system in Hampton. A neighbor who thought the house was empty.
The amount of brush that separates these houses. So there's a house over here, and then there's this huge bunch of brush here, like a patch of brush. And then there's even more brush that goes down here. So there's all of this brush that separates one house from the other. And it's basically like a whole lot, maybe even 2 lots on this street that separate these 2 houses. There's really only 3 houses on this street. The house where the Cers were living is one of them. So if I turn like this, you see it. Now I'm going to give you a 360-degree view because you turn like this, and there's a railroad track. So we have a railroad track over here, and then a barn of sorts, a mobile home across the way. But really, there aren't a lot of people who live here at all.
We turned 360 degrees. There's a railroad track, a barn, a mobile home across the way, 3 houses on the whole street, separated by empty lots that swallow sound, no sidewalks. No foot traffic, no sightlines. If a family wanted to disappear inside a structure, geography did the hiding for them.
Who said she had seen 2 or 3 children playing outside a couple of years ago. Another neighbor told me that he'd lived there for more than 20 years and had never seen any children, and he had a bird's eye view of the house. Well,
Another neighbor, a man with a direct line of sight, told us he'd lived there over 20 years and never saw a single child, not one. That kind of invisibility isn't accidental. It's architectural.
I drove by because I was just kind of curious to see actually, because there's so many rumors, you know what I mean, of what's real, what's not, what the cops saw, if they're sensationalizing it, and I really don't think they are, based off of what I've seen. It's horrible, and a lot of people are saying it's a poverty thing, living poor. A lot of people live poor in this area. I don't have money like that, but I don't live like that, you know what I mean? Poverty and dirty are two different things. I mean, the cockroaches, the filth, you don't have to let your kids live like that. So I just kind of wanted to see if I could...
Then a local woman drove by, curious about the rumors. She said something that cleaves through every talking point. Poverty and dirty are two different things. She's right. The state wants this to be a story about filth, but the sealed warrant turns it into a story about something else. Something the state does not want you to inspect.
And whether the situation had been blown out of proportion, the family member wrote. I think most of what's happened in this specific case has been blown way out of proportion. I mean, I could be wrong, of course, but I honestly and truly want to believe that because while the entire picture is dark and scary, I don't think it's really as dark and scary as the internet can be. I can only speak from my own experiences, no one else's. It's sad and tragic all the way around, but maybe they all thought they were doing the best they could with extremely limited resources, and it spiraled way out of hand. Resources, as in money, education, support, and just outside POV and resources in general. Maybe I'm entirely wrong. Again,
A family member posted on Facebook that maybe the whole situation had been blown way out of proportion, that the internet has made this whole situation way worse. That's a line of argument you'll hear from the defense table. But the real defense isn't a Facebook post. The real defense is a legal motion to modify bail, and we'll get to that. Because here's the ticking clock. If the state had enough probable cause to convince a judge to cross the threshold of a home, why is it now fighting a newspaper to keep that probable cause affidavit out of public view? What is in that box that's more dangerous than the images we've already been allowed to imagine?
The law is, as long as the parent consents, there is no age under which a child can get married. Reasonable minds can disagree as to how comfortable of a feeling we have about that kind of setup. However, once they started having children, that's completely legal. And the idea that a hospital will say, hey, you're having a lot of kids, there's something going on here, I don't know that I agree. Again, that's government intrusion into the private lives of individuals. And unless there was something about how she presented, perhaps she showed up with bruises and there was a question whether she was being abused by her husband, or the children were born and they were born with some type of drug addiction or something like that, which gave view into the idea of them conducting or being engaged in criminal activity. I don't know.
Now about the parents. Gary Ginder and Elizabeth married when he was 18 and she was 15 in West Virginia, where the law allows a child of any age to marry with parental consent. She started having children at 15. By the time deputies entered that house, she had given birth 18 times. The state's own documents confirm that. There is no law against having a large family. There is no law against seeking a midwife. And that's precisely why the sealed warrant matters so much. Because if the initial entry was legal, we need to see the affidavit that justified it. If it wasn't, every single piece of evidence found inside that home could be fruit of a poisoned tree.
Children's Services in Gallia County, where the family originally lived, had some contact and a visit with this family. And that very well may have been what prompted them to move up to Venton County several years back, in the last 4 years or so. Is that common, do you think, for people to move around to avoid children's services? Have you ever seen that before?
Sure, and not just to avoid children's services, but to avoid being exposed for other types of activities that they're engaged in. We have 88 counties in the state of Ohio. Just one state, 88 counties. In fact, Venton is, I think I read, it's got about 12,000 people, the least populous county out of all 88 in the state of Ohio. It's a largely rural area. As I drive sometimes to Virginia, my alma mater is there. I go through parts of West Virginia, I go through parts of rural Ohio, and it's kind of amazing to me to see how spaced out people.
Former judge and prosecutor Fanon Rucker noted that families sometimes move to avoid the watchful eye of children's services. The Cers had prior addresses in Gallia County. There is reason to believe they had contact with that county's child welfare system before relocating to Venton County, the least populous county in Ohio. That movement pattern appears in case files across the country. It does not prove guilt, it proves a survival instinct, and it raises the stakes of every sealed document.
You mentioned the possibility of avoiding detection of other activities that people might be involved in. I mean, let's be frank here. What brought the cops to this house in the first place was the fact that they had a search warrant. They were going in there to look for evidence of a crime. We don't know what crime yet because those documents are sealed. Gary Jr. was charged with public indecency, 4 counts of public indecency for alleged incidents that happened the last week of May. However, I don't think that the state of Ohio is going into a house looking for evidence after, for a public misdemeanor public indecency case. And it's my understanding this is not related to that public indecency case. So there was another crime that they were interested in that initially brought them there, and then poof, they go in there and they find 16 kids. So there's something more here. There's more meat on the bone, potentially.
And here's the detail that reframes everything. Gary Cers Jr. was charged with 4 counts of public indecency for alleged acts in late May. But we know from court records that the June 30th search warrant was not related to a misdemeanor indecency case. It was tied to a different, still secret investigation. So the state entered that home hunting evidence of one crime and stumbled upon what it now calls a house of horrors. That's not a footnote. That's the headline. They had a warrant for something else.
For federal magistrates to sign off on. I've been a prosecutor for several municipalities, obviously as a judge for 13 years. I saw a lot of cases and investigations, and the result of great police work, like I think we can argue here, absolutely is the case. And what's surprising to me, and surprising to a lot of people that I talk to, is how the truth is many people are not the original targets of an investigation, but by virtue of other conduct that they're engaged in or people that they're communicating with who may be under investigation, they then get caught up in the net or their crimes get exposed. And it's very possible that what they were looking for here, again, unrelated to the children, is absolutely what led them to discover the conditions and the health conditions of these children who they didn't even know apparently were there before that search warrant was actually executed.
In order to sign off on a search warrant to enter somebody's home, do you have to show a good amount of evidence in order to do that?
You do. One of the things that the United States Supreme Court and every Supreme Court in the states of our great United States, every single Supreme Court has ruled that the sanctity of the home is inviolate, meaning you got to have a heaviest of information before we're going to allow law enforcement to cross the threshold of a person's private residence. And so as a judge, we are required, and I did that for more of my career than I didn't do that, we're required to look at the facts and its probable cause. It's an affidavit that comes in with a law enforcement official, sometimes with health department advocates, sometimes with housing officials, and they come in with all of these pictures, and they come in with statements from sworn individuals who have observed stuff, and they present it to the judge, and that says, all right, there's smoke here, we need to go and find the fire. But there has to be a whole lot of smoke and maybe some flames peeking through the window before a judge is supposed to allow law enforcement to enter.
Judge Rucker explained what it takes to get a search warrant signed. You don't just knock on a judge's door and whisper suspicions. You present an affidavit, sworn statements, pictures, probable cause thick enough that a judicial officer agrees to violate the sanctity of a home, the most protected space in American constitutional law. The judge must see a whole lot of smoke and maybe some flames peeking through the window before signing. That means somewhere in the Venton County courthouse sits a sworn narrative that convinced a judge. And yet that narrative remains hidden. The public is asked to trust the outcome while being denied the predicate.
And finally, I want to ask you about the bail modification motion that Elizabeth Sider's attorney has filed. The prosecutor at the time that we're recording this hasn't yet responded to that motion to modify the terms of the bail. Her attorney just wants her to be released without her having to post any type of cash bond whatsoever. He said she's indigent, she doesn't have any money, that she would behave on GPS monitoring, things of to that effect. How likely do you think that's going to happen in this case?
Well, that all depends. We are used to sensational cases. And when I say sensational cases, I'm talking about serial killers, and we're used to big drug cases. And when they appear in court, there's cameras in the courtroom, and the judge will order a $10 million bond or $1 million bond. And really, the primary purpose of bond, at its core, the primary purpose of bond is to ensure that the defendant will appear for trial. That is the primary purpose of bond. Now, there are several factors that we have to take into consideration in making that decision, but there is no mathematical calculation or any particular formula that judges follow when deciding what bond is appropriate to place on an individual accused of a crime. Here, what we know is there were 16 children who were in deplorable conditions in a home where the father, mother, and grandparents were living, and they were subjected to, according to the prosecutor, severe, pervasive, intergenerational abuse and neglect. What bond is appropriate for individuals who are living in poverty circumstances? $300,000 was the bond that was given to each one of them, saying that if you're going to be released while this case is pending, you got to post $300,000 each. The reality is, what are their financial circumstances? Could that $300,000 might be $1 million, or could that $300,000 serve its same cause with the $5,000 bond because they don't have the resources to bond themselves out? And even if they do, what chances, with no prior criminal history, with few contacts in other places, what is the likelihood that they're not going to come back? I mean, that really is the issue, not the allegations of how horrible of a condition they allowed their children to exist in, but what is the current risk of harm to themselves, to the children who we know have been removed, and to others, to the community. Those are factors that the court must take into consideration, or should take into consideration, when deciding what an appropriate bail is, if a person is going to be released, or what other conditions. So, I understand she doesn't have a prior record. She's 33 years old, started having kids at 15. The kids have all been removed. They don't have financial resources. Personally, based on 30 years of experience in the courts and criminal prosecutions and judicial activities, I would be very surprised if the court does not lower that bail to something less than $100,000. I can't say OR as the grandfather was, but he had health problems and they had to get him out of there because financially the county wasn't going to be able to sustain his medical treatment, so they let him out on OR bond. I don't know that that's what she'll get, but I would be very surprised if her bond was not significantly reduced now that the danger to the children has been.
Finally, the bail motion. Elizabeth Cers' attorney wants her released without cash bond. He says she's indigent. The current bond is $300,000 each. Rucker predicted it will be reduced, not because the allegations aren't serious, but because the primary purpose of bond is to ensure appearance at trial, and the danger to the children has been neutralized by their removal. That's cold legal calculus. It sounds offensive to a public that has already convicted the family in the court of social media, but it is exactly how the law works. The same law that allows a judge to seal a search warrant with a single oral request. And so we end where we began, with a box, not a house, a docket entry. Go to the Venton County Clerk of Court's website, pull the case file for State of Ohio v. Gary Cers Juder, find the Columbus Dispatch's motion to unseal the search warrant, read the state's response, then ask yourself the question we can't answer for you. If the conditions were as horrific as described, why does the state need to hide the reason it walked through the door? Tell us in the comments. We'll read every one. If you believe the public has a right to examine the evidence that justifies a government search, like this video, share it, subscribe to Endless Cryme, and turn on notifications. We don't just cover the story, we follow the paper.